My son stood before our entire family on Christmas Day and, with a smirk, said he'd gifted my villa to his in-laws without asking me. I remember the sting, not just of betrayal, but of erasure. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. Instead, I smiled, walked to my room, and quietly opened the safe that held the deed, in my name. That was the moment everything changed, and trust me, this story was only getting started. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I stepped through the front door of Villa Ardelia, its holiday wreath crooked like a forgotten invitation. My red coat still held the faint scent of cedar from my closet, the only festive trace I could carry. In my hands, a gift basket, a carefully chosen mix of chocolates, scented soaps, and a bottle of Cabernet. I had debated leaving it on the porch. The hallway welcomed me with strange perfume, not the lavender I used for years, but something floral, artificial. New rugs softened the hardwood under my shoes. Family portraits lined the walls, only these weren't mine. Valora's side had taken over, her parents with wide, white-toothed grins, her brother in uniform, a Christmas card perfection of a family I barely knew. In the living room, Declan stood near the fireplace, his arm draped around Valora's waist. He looked tired but groomed, a man in command of someone else's house, our house. He caught my eye, offered a tight smile, and turned away to speak with a caterer. Valora waved at me, then returned to the couple she was entertaining. I hadn't even taken off my coat. The dining room was already dressed for a feast. A long table stretched from the fireplace to the French doors, aglow with golden plates and candles in silver holders. I scanned the place cards, trailing my fingers along the calligraphy. Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove, Cousin Nessa, Uncle Trey, and Meredith. My name wasn't there. At the far end, a small round table was set for two chairs, a simpler arrangement. I moved closer, my stomach nodding. Before I could speak, Valora's voice floated over. Just keep her at the side table. She likes quiet. She wasn't speaking to me. The server nodded. Of course. Background music played, jazz renditions of carols I used to hum with Declan as a boy. Glasses clinked. Laughter rippled down the main table. My feet felt heavy, as though the rug was dragging me down into its fibers. I eased into the side chair, my back to the kitchen door. I never took off my coat. Dinner moved swiftly in curated courses. I barely touched my plate, instead listening as Valora's father joked about his retirement plans. Then Declan rose, tapping his glass for attention. I just want to say how grateful we are to have you all here, he began. To the Hargroves, thank you for making the trip. To my amazing in-laws, thank you for making this home so beautiful. He went on, thanking cousins, even the event planner. He did not say my name. I felt the heat rise up my neck. Beneath the table, my hand gripped the napkin so tightly I heard the stitch pop. No one noticed. No one turned. The clink of silverware resumed, and so did my silence. When dessert came, I stood up. No one asked where I was going. I walked through the kitchen and out the back door. The garden, strung with fairy lights, looked like something from a movie set. The cold air bit through my coat. I wrapped it tighter, sinking into the silence. From where I stood, I could see them through the window. Valora's parents clinking forks, the children giggling over whipped cream. The tree stood in the corner, gleaming with ornaments I once unpacked every December with Declan. I had written the years on the backs in tiny black ink. Now, they twirled anonymously in the twinkle light. I thought about the gingerbread men we used to make. The flower on Declan's nose. The way he used to sit in my lap when his father was still alive. That was a different Christmas. That was my house. The night ended with a final blow. As I waited for my coat near the entrance, a waiter approached Valora's mother. "Ma'am, here's your coat, and thank you for having us. Your home is beautiful." She laughed. "Thank you. We're so happy to celebrate here." I was a few feet away. The waiter didn't look at me. Valora's mother didn't correct him. I didn't say a word. As I walked out into the night, alone, I looked back at Villa Ardelia. The lights glowed warmly inside, but I felt none of it. This wasn't neglect. It was erasure. And yet, the deed still has my name on it. They just don't know that. Yet. The clinking of crystal glasses rose like wind chimes in a breeze, sweet, bright, and utterly excluding. One by one, champagne flutes were handed to everyone in the room, golden bubbles catching candlelight. I stood near the fireplace, hand slightly raised, anticipating, but when the server passed by, he paused. His tray hovered near my shoulder for the briefest moment, then floated past without stopping. "Excuse me," I said softly. "May I have one?" He hesitated, eyes darting toward the far end of the room, where Valora's mother sat perched on the edge of a velvet chaise, nodding almost imperceptibly. The server gave me a polite, apologetic look and mumbled something about running out of glasses, then vanished. I looked down at my empty hand. Around me, the room toasted, laughed, and sipped. My own son, Declan, leaned into Valora's father, raising his glass high. I had never felt more like a ghost in my own home. I needed air. The French doors to the garden were slightly ajar, the breeze pushing them open like an invitation. Outside, the roses I once planted were now trimmed too precisely, their wildness tamed. The night wrapped around me in quiet relief. That's when I heard her. Valora's mother stood in the parlor just inside, speaking low to one of the maids. "Take that old throw off the couch. Yes, the faded one. Looks like something from a thrift shop." She meant the quilt. My quilt. The one I made with Richard years ago, when his chemo had made him too tired to leave the house. Each square held a memory. Our trip to Napa. His old law school sweatshirt. A scrap from Declan's first Halloween costume. To them, it was just old. To me, it was a part of my marriage stitched together in cotton and thread. The maid nodded and disappeared inside. I didn't say a word. I only stood there, watching Valora's mother walk away like she had every right to dictate what belonged in this house. Every step she took chipped away at my presence. An hour later, a voice from behind me broke the stillness. "Beautiful property. You must be proud." I turned. It was Graham Holloway, a former colleague of Declan's from law school. He had always been kind to me in the past, warm, respectful. Tonight, however, his gaze landed past me. He walked straight to Valora's father, grasping his hand in a hearty shake. "It's great what you've done with the place, really." I stood frozen. Graham had assumed, of course he had. Everything in the house had been rebranded. The portraits changed, the decorations unfamiliar, the tone unmistakably foreign. Why would anyone think it was mine? "Thank you," Valora's father replied smoothly, accepting the compliment with the grace of someone used to undeserved praise. I forced a smile when Graham glanced back at me. I didn't correct him. I couldn't. My silence had never felt louder. Later, as dinner plates were cleared and dessert wines circulated, Declan tapped his glass with a spoon. The room quieted. "I just wanted to say," he began, "this year's been transformative." He looked toward Valora's parents. "You two have given so much. Your love, your traditions, your elegance." I tilted my head slightly. "Traditions?" "This home," he said, lifting his glass, "feels more like family now than ever before. Consider it our gift to you." Laughter erupted around the table. Valora dabbed her eyes, touched. I didn't laugh. My heart pounded. My hands trembled in my lap. I stared at my plate, half-finished pecan tart, untouched whipped cream, and thought, he just gave them my house, out loud, even if it was a joke. After the laughter died down and guests began to retreat to their corners, I remained seated. From across the room, I watched Valora's mother descend the grand staircase with a glass of wine in hand, her fingers grazing the polished banister like she'd lived there all her life. I rose slowly, walked toward the front hallway. On the wall near the entry hung a painting, an abstract Richard had bought on our anniversary trip to Santa Fe. His favorite. My hand reached out, fingers brushing the edge of the frame. I remembered the words of my lawyer, said months ago in a quiet office with no scent of cinnamon or music playing. "Don't speak," she had advised, "until you're ready to end it all." Tonight, I wasn't ready. But soon, I would be. Valora opened my bedroom door without knocking, her heels clicking against the hardwood as if this was her home. "Lois?" she called out casually, her voice echoing just loud enough to be heard in the hallway. I froze in place. Lois. That name hit harder than any insult. My name, not Mom, not even mother-in-law. Just Lois. As if I were a guest in my own life. A couple of guests walking by paused and turned their heads. One of them, a distant cousin from my late husband's side, raised an eyebrow. Valora noticed the moment too, but didn't flinch. She merely smiled, adjusting her silk shawl, the kind of smile a woman wears when she's winning. I didn't respond. I simply walked past her, back straight, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. But inside, something chipped. Another piece of the structure I'd built for my family began to fall away. It was only when I closed my bedroom door behind me that the memory surged back. Years ago, Declan had come to me during one of the hardest times, just months after his father passed. "Mom," he'd said gently, eyes red-rimmed, voice shaky. "The lawyer says we need to get ahead of the estate stuff. There's this form. It's just a formality. We'll transfer assets for tax reasons. You'll still own everything. It's just to protect things, okay?" He was 34 then, newly married, full of ambition and heartbreak. I had nodded, numb and tired, and signed the paper he handed me. I didn't read it thoroughly. I just trusted him. But one phrase had stuck with me even back then: intergenerational asset transfer. It sounded too official for something supposedly just a formality. That night, I knelt by the dresser and opened a small locked drawer that hadn't been touched in years. Underneath a stack of old Christmas cards and a photo of Declan at his college graduation, I found the paperwork, the copy I'd kept, just in case. I unfolded it slowly, fingers trembling. The legal jargon blurred and reformed in my mind like a foreign language I used to know. Was I still the owner? Or had I signed it all away? Self-doubt crept in. Maybe I was foolish. Maybe this was all my fault. Maybe I had handed Valora everything she now wielded against me, wrapped in a ribbon of ignorance. Later, I stood before the mirror. The lights cast soft shadows across my cheeks, and I saw not a woman aged by time, but one weathered by choices. "You raised him to be strong," I whispered, barely audible, "but not like this." There was pain in my voice. But more than that, there was realization. This wasn't just Valora's doing. Declan, my Declan, had played his part too. Whether blinded by love or ambition, he'd stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as an obstacle. I picked up my phone, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. "Margot," I began. "If you're listening to this, it's because I need someone to know what's going on. They've changed the house, not just the rugs and pictures. They've changed who I am inside these walls." I paused, breath hitching. I think I may have signed something I shouldn't have. Years ago. Declan was grieving. I was grieving. I didn't think. I played it back once. My voice sounded tired but clear. Then I deleted it. "Not yet," I said aloud. Because something had shifted inside me. A small gear clicking into place. I needed to know exactly what I had signed before I made any move. The kitchen used to be mine. Every drawer, Every spice jar had its place. But that morning, it felt foreign, like a house I'd once visited in a dream but couldn't quite recognize. I reached for the kettle, same one I bought years ago, I think, but even the clink of ceramic on stovetop sounded unfamiliar. I set out a single cup, poured myself a weak brew. Christmas morning used to mean pancakes and bacon, the scent pulling sleepy feet down the stairs. Now, just silence. My chair was still tucked under the table, like no one had used it, or remembered to. Then she walked in, Valora's mother. She wore my old robe, a faded blue one with fraying cuffs. She yawned theatrically, tying the sash as if she'd lived here her whole life. "Oh, didn't see you there," she said casually. "I live here," I replied, not looking up. She didn't respond, just helped herself to the fridge and hummed as if claiming every inch. I sat down, cradling my mug. The tea was bitter. From the library, I heard voices, low, hurried. I tiptoed closer, staying behind the cracked door. "We'll finalize the title after New Year's," Declan said. Valora's voice followed. "She won't even realize. She's older. She forgets things." There was a pause. My heart thudded in my ears. Declan added, "We'll keep it smooth, quiet." They were talking about the house, about Villa Ardelia, about me. I backed away slowly, not making a sound, and returned to the kitchen where my untouched tea had gone cold. Later, I asked Declan to meet me on the back patio. It was where he'd learned to ride a bike, where I taught him the names of flowers. He showed up wearing the same smirk he used to get away with skipped chores. I stood near the iron garden chair. My voice was calm. "I remember what I signed, Declan, and I want to see the full documents." He blinked, caught off guard. "Mom, what? Why now?" "You're misunderstanding." "I'm not misunderstanding, I just want clarity." He laughed lightly. "You're being paranoid. You don't trust me?" "Paranoia is what you feel when the truth is close." His face tightened. "There's no need to dig all this up. It was a long time ago." "Then it should be easy to explain." He said nothing, just looked out at the hedges I once trimmed every spring. I walked away, not giving him a chance to spin another story. Back inside, I stood in the hallway, heart still pounding. Valora's voice echoed faintly upstairs, some joke to her mother. I didn't care. I headed for my study. In the safe, tucked behind old tax records and Jasper's baby photos, was an envelope. Yellowed slightly, sealed. I had never opened it. Not fully. Declan had given it to me years ago. "Just a formality," he'd said. I had believed him. I placed it gently on my desk. The weight of it seemed heavier than paper. Not today. Not yet. But soon. I looked out the window. The garden was still. My fingers rested on the edge of the desk, tracing the grain of the wood. How many times had I sat here, budgeting, planning, holding our lives together? I had spent my life holding this family together. Maybe it was time to pull it apart. The sound of laughter drifted through the corridor like a slow leak from a pipe I couldn't quite find. I stood outside the formal dining room, once a space of grace and gratitude, and now a battleground of mood boards and marble swatches. Through the crack in the door, I saw Valora's mother, Clarice, presiding like a general, pointing at architectural renderings spread across my mahogany table. "This whole wing will be perfect," she said, gesturing with a pencil. "We'll open up this wall and put in a steam room, maybe even a private terrace here." Lois's bedroom. That was the wing. I felt my stomach turn. Behind her stood a contractor scribbling notes, nodding without question. Clarice didn't even pause to wonder if I'd overhear. Her confidence was that absolute, that complete. My hand gripped the edge of the wall as I took a breath, steady, quiet. They called this a design consultation. I called it a trespass. I walked into my bedroom and nearly tripped over the samples. Swatches of velvet and faux fur lay across my quilt like an invasion. tile samples sat stacked by the closet door. A note placed delicately on my pillow read in swooping cursive, "Will start Monday, V." My name wasn't on the note. It wasn't a question. It was a decree. I picked it up, held it between two fingers like it might burn. It didn't, but I wished it had, because the absence of fire only highlighted the cold calculation. I opened my closet and began packing. Not much, just what I needed. Comfortable shoes, my old notepad, the envelope I'd retrieved from the safe. It was time to see someone who could still call lies by their proper name. The downtown office was colder than I remembered, both in temperature and tone. Gerald, my attorney for nearly 2 decades, greeted me with a quiet "Lois" and raised brows that said more than words could. I handed him the document. My copy of the intergenerational asset transfer Declan had insisted I sign years ago. Back when he'd just started his business, when he cried on my shoulder and swore it was just for loan backing. He read it slowly, flipping through the pages. Then he leaned back. "This was never finalized." My heart skipped. No notary, no final witness, no counter-signature from you on the last page. It's incomplete. My chest loosened. Not with relief, but with room. Room for something fierce and electric. "So," I said, "I still own everything. Fully, legally, without question." I nodded once, then smiled. A real one. The first in a while. I didn't say a word when I returned home. Didn't even glance at the hall where the contractors had started taking measurements. Clarice raised a glass of champagne in my direction as I walked past the parlor. I raised an eyebrow and kept walking. Declan found me by the staircase. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, the kind of question that was always more obligation than concern. I smiled wide. Never better. He looked puzzled. Good. Upstairs, I placed the folder Gerald had given me, his formal letter of affirmation and a notarized summary of my ownership, into the safe. I let my fingers run over the edge of the paper like one might run a hand across a blade. "Game on," I whispered. Not out of vengeance, not out of pettiness, out of justice. The moonlight spilled across the wood floor like a witness. I stood by the window, listening to the sound of laughter downstairs, an echo of a family that once was. They toasted to spa dreams and title changes, sipping champagne under a roof I paid for, in walls I plastered with memories. But they had no idea, not yet. I would not scream. I would not plead. I would not beg for a seat. They wanted to erase me. I was ready to erase their illusions. The sun crept through the blinds of Villa Ardelia with a quiet insistence that morning. I dressed in navy slacks and a white blouse, the kind of outfit I used to wear to court filings, back when people took my word seriously. Downstairs, the smell of rosemary and baked eggs drifted through the halls. Brunch was already underway. The dining room buzzed with noise. Valora's mother, ever the hostess, lifted her glass of mimosa, chirping, "To fresh beginnings!" as if we were all on some collective family vacation instead of trespassing on the very bones of my history. I sat at the end of the table, technically not the kids' side, but not the head either. It had become my unofficial place lately. Seen, barely heard. No one asked me if I wanted coffee or how I liked the fruit salad. Even the maid glanced toward Valora's mother before bringing me a plate. Declan laughed at something Valora whispered, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. He didn't even look my way. I sipped my tea and placed my hand on my lap to steady it. Let them have their toasts. I had brought something better than words. Midway through Valora's father's half-hearted attempt at a joke, I rose from my chair. Forks clinked on plates. The room stilled. I reached into the leather tote I'd placed beside me and pulled out a crisp legal envelope. I laid it on the tablecloth in front of Declan. "This home," I said, "is mine. Always has been." The air changed, subtle at first, then dense with tension. Valora blinked. "Lois, what?" My name, I corrected gently, is Mom. But if you're confused, the paperwork will clarify things. I unfolded the document slowly, my lawyer's formal declaration of continued ownership, with every necessary signature intact. The golden notary seal glinted under the chandelier. "This is real?" murmured a cousin from down the table. Declan's face reddened. "Are you serious right now?" he hissed. "You're bringing this up over brunch?" Valora let out a nervous laugh. "It's just senior confusion, surely. She must have misunderstood something from decades ago." I met her eyes. What I misunderstood was how easy it is to be erased. Declan reached for the paper. "Let me see that." I placed my hand over it. Not yet. The silence around us grew brittle. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised through feverish nights and spelling bees, the man who now looked at me like a hostile witness. "I've already contacted a lawyer," I said calmly. "An injunction is being filed first thing Monday. If anyone starts remodeling this house or tampers with anything, you'll be held liable, civilly and legally." Valora's fork dropped onto her plate with a sharp clink. Her mother opened her mouth but said nothing. Declan exhaled hard through his nose. I gathered the document, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it under my arm. "I wanted you to know," I said, "before you planned your next toast." And then I walked out. In the garden, I found the old stone bench beneath the pear tree Walter had planted the summer before his diagnosis. I sat, the sun warming my face, and listened to the quiet beyond the glass doors. The brunch resumed, but softer, unsure of itself. I looked up at the tree branches, whispered to no one in particular. "You'd be proud I didn't let them win." And I meant it. I sat at our favorite corner table at the neighborhood coffee shop, steam curling from my mug like the doubt that settled in my chest. My friend Eileen sat across from me, concern etched on her face. "I don't want to worry you, Ms. Ardelia," she said softly, "but there's something odd going around online. A post saying someone forged your signature to take the house." I forced a smile. "Forged? What on earth?" My voice felt thin, fragile. Eileen handed me her phone. I scrolled. There it was. A grandiose accusation. Lois placed a fake deed and stole her own home? Sad. Valora's brother had posted it, and it had been shared thousands of times. I could feel the room shift. The coffee shop chatter hummed in the background, but I knew their thoughts were louder than any whispers. My heart pounded with a flush of anger and sinking dread. That evening at home, I logged onto Facebook from the safety of my own study. The post had exploded, comments arriving like blunt arrows. "What an embarrassment to the family. Wonder what else she's hiding. LOL, the grandma who lost her mind again." There were so many. They blurred together. Hate disguised as humor. Ridicule wrapped in shares. I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms. Silence in my own home had become deafening. The next morning, my mailbox held an envelope with no return address. The paper inside read, "Drop your lawsuit or we'll ruin you." No signature, no name, just a thin white slip of paper with a threat stretching across the room. I pressed it against my chest, my breath steady but slow. I whispered, "Let them try," because threats didn't scare me, not anymore. Later that day, I sat across from Gerald in his office. He listened as I poured out everything, the public defamation, the anonymous menace. He nodded. "We have laws to protect you, Lois. We can pursue defamation. We can also trace that message." "This crosses into harassment and cyberbullying." I exhaled, a burst of relief. "Then let's do it," I said, voice steady. "It's time to play offense." His eyes softened. "We'll draft the complaint today." The tension in my shoulders loosened. For months, I had been reacting. Now, I would take action. That evening, at home, I sat at my desk between the study and living room. The house hummed around me, lights, murmured conversation, the faint clinking of wine glasses. I opened my notepad and began. A statement. who I was, what I owned, and the record of every false accusation. I started attaching piece after piece of evidence: my lawyer's letter, notarized documents, the original purchase record, every copy in date order. I wrote until my hand ached. When I finished, the words on the page felt firmer than any walls had ever seemed. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let a quiet strength settle. They assumed I was fragile. I was not. I would not be silenced again. Valora insisted this would help. "Just a family talk, Lois. We all need clarity." I wanted to say no. Every fiber in my body told me this wasn't a conversation, it was a performance, but Declan, my son, had asked me to come. "Just hear us out," he said, eyes tired. So I did. I showed up, once again, for the sake of a son who hadn't shown up for me in years. They gathered in the main living room of the villa, the house I built, the house I owned. There were no holiday decorations left, just the lingering smell of cinnamon and citrus clinging to the curtains. Valora's parents sat rigidly on the sectional. Her brother hovered by the fireplace. Declan paced near the windows. I sat in the armchair that used to be my reading corner, now positioned like a defendant's chair. Valora stood. Her voice was polished, too calm. "We've all been confused lately. Accusations, tension, but I think we need transparency." "Mom," she caught herself, "Lois has said things that deeply concern us." And so it began. She started with tears, wiping the corners of her eyes delicately. "Declan didn't want me to say this, but I can't stay silent. Lois manipulated him into signing things he didn't understand. She told him it was for tax purposes." Declan didn't speak. He didn't look at me either. Valora's voice rose with righteous fervor. "She's been playing the victim, but she's the one controlling everything. She had him sign the house over and now acts like she's the martyr." There were murmurs of agreement. Valora's mother nodded solemnly, like a pastor's wife hearing confession. I sat still. I let them finish. When the silence fell, thick and anticipatory, I stood up. I walked calmly to the side table, reached into my handbag, and pulled out a brown envelope. "I didn't come here to defend myself," I said, voice steady. "But I did come with facts." Valora's expression twitched. I opened the envelope and pulled out neatly clipped stacks. Copies of the property's deed, my late husband's will, the unexecuted transfer papers. Each document dated, notarized, and legally binding. "This," I said, holding up the first document, "proves I never relinquished ownership." Then I pulled out a USB drive. "And this," I added, "contains a voice recording of Valora's brother threatening me, as well as screenshots of posts he made online accusing me of forgery." Valora flushed. "That's not—" I raised my hand. "I'm not finished." I laid out another sheet. Expenditures from the house account. Large sums transferred to a personal Venmo account labeled under Valora's maiden name. Cosmetic procedures, shopping sprees, a 3-night stay in Napa. None of this, I said, looking directly at Declan, was discussed with me. All drawn from joint assets I never agreed to share. For the first time, Declan looked at me. Really looked. He didn't speak. Valora opened her mouth, then closed it. Her parents shifted uncomfortably. I exhaled, slow and even. "I didn't come for apologies," I said. "I came for truth. I raised my son to be strong, but not blind." Then I stood, gathered my envelope, and walked to the door. No one followed. The silence was louder than the accusations. Outside, the air was cool and still. I paused at the walkway, letting my hand brush the rose bush my husband planted when Declan was born. "I didn't come here for permission," I whispered. "Just the truth." And I had finally spoken it. The morning light slid through the lace curtains like it always had. My orchids on the windowsill leaned toward it, thirsty for warmth. I sat at the breakfast table alone, cradling a cup of chamomile, the steam kissing my cheek. For a brief moment, it felt like any other peaceful day. But something had shifted. I could feel it, like a tremor under the surface. I noticed it first in the way Helen, my neighbor of 15 years, walked by without her usual wave. She looked straight ahead, her eyes brushing mine, and then darting away as if I were a stranger. I set down my cup, heart pacing. Maybe it was nothing, but maybe not. At the grocery store later that morning, I reached for the card reader, swiped my debit card, and waited. Declined. I tried again. Same result. The cashier gave me that smile, sympathetic but impatient. "I'm sure there's a mistake," I mumbled, pulling out my phone. The bank's customer service was polite but vague. "There's an internal hold on your account, Mrs. Winters," the representative said. "It appears to be flagged under a fraud check, pending investigation." "Fraud? I didn't report any fraud." "We understand. These things happen sometimes. You'll need to come in with ID." I walked out of the store empty-handed, clutching my coat tight around me despite the sun. That evening, I stopped by the church to drop off the quilts I'd sewn for the shelter. The foyer smelled of pine and old hymnals. I overheard the voices before they saw me. She just took the house? After all Declan and Valora did for her? She manipulated him, that poor boy. I froze behind the corner. The voices belonged to women I knew, ladies I'd baked with, prayed with. I peeked around the edge and saw them huddled over a phone. One tapped the screen and said, "See? Valora posted this last week." I didn't want to see, but I knew. My name had become a headline in someone else's story. By Friday, the whispers had become walls. At book club, chairs filled every seat except the one beside mine. No one said anything. No accusations, no questions. Just silence that spoke louder than any words. Even Pastor Glenn, who had once comforted me through my husband's funeral, pulled me aside gently after service. "Perhaps, Lois, it might help if you take a small break. Let the dust settle. For everyone's peace." Peace. I smiled with all the strength I could muster. Of course. That night, I sat by the fireplace, staring at the embers, piecing it all together. Frozen finances, whispered lies, public shame. This wasn't just a backlash, it was war. They were trying to isolate me, erase me socially just as they'd tried to do legally. Valora wasn't acting alone. This was coordinated, strategic, and cruel. But what they didn't know, what they never understood, was that I'd been underestimated my entire life. I went to my desk and pulled out my notebook. My pen met paper, not with shaking hands, but with purpose. "No more hiding," I whispered to the flames. "No more hoping they'll stop. They won't." I turned to the last page and wrote, underlined twice, "Let them come. But be ready." The house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't loneliness I felt. It was resolve. I opened the tall armoire in my late husband's study, brushing past coats that still held a trace of his aftershave. Tucked in the back, behind a box of old legal pads and bundled tax files, sat his worn leather briefcase. My fingers traced its edge. Inside, I found his address book, neat handwriting in fading ink. One name stood out. Mira Solis, a young intern he once mentored. A brilliant, sharp-minded law student who had visited us for dinner once, all nerves and ambition. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Lois, I remember you. How could I not? Mr. Bishop spoke about you every day." I exhaled. "Mira, I need your help." 2 hours later, she was sitting in my kitchen, sipping tea and reviewing documents with a fierce clarity in her eyes. "This is a mess, but it's not unbeatable," she said. "They left fingerprints all over their sabotage." And just like that, I wasn't alone. We spent the week rebuilding my defense and preparing an offense. Mira's laptop glowed late into the night. With every click, we followed the digital crumbs Valora left behind. Anonymous posts traced to her office IP. Fake accounts linked back to her brother's email. Financial records showed large withdrawals made by Declan from our joint account months before the house debacle began. It was no longer about one betrayal. It was a pattern of calculated deceit. We printed tax forms, pulled archived bank statements, highlighted inconsistencies, flagged fraudulent invoices. Mira contacted former staff at the villa, who agreed to testify under oath about verbal abuse and under-the-table dealings. Every piece fit together like a puzzle I never wanted to solve, but couldn't ignore any longer. The letters went out 3 days later. Cease and desist notices, delivered to Valora's employer, the church board, the community newsletter's editor, and, most satisfyingly, to Declan and Valora's shared P.O. box. I saved one delivery for myself. That Sunday, I dressed in the same navy dress I wore to my retirement ceremony. I walked into the community luncheon where Valora held court at the center table. Murmurs started the moment I stepped in. I didn't need a microphone. I approached her, gently laid the letter beside her plate of fruit salad, and said, "You've had your turn? Now it's mine." She looked up, blinking, a hint of color draining from her cheeks. I didn't wait for a response. 2 days later, an unexpected ally emerged. Ethel Harris, head of the Neighborhood Historical Society and the most respected member of the women's circle, invited me for coffee. She had read everything Mira helped me prepare, every timeline, every receipt, every notarized truth. "I believe you, Lois," she said, folding her hands over mine. "They took advantage of your silence, your right to fight back." The next Sunday, she spoke up in church. Not with accusation, just with grace and facts. It's time we look before we judge. The tide shifted, slowly but visibly. Whispers softened. Side eyes stopped. The cold shoulder began to thaw. That evening, I stood at my office window watching the trees sway in the wind. "I don't want just to survive this," I told Mira, who was now practically family. "I want to reclaim every inch of dignity they tried to take." She nodded. "Then we don't stop here." I walked over to my safe, opened it, and placed the notarized records, legal strategies, and a freshly printed lawsuit outline inside. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. "They wanted a fight," I said softly. "They were about to meet the real me." The envelope sat in the middle of my desk, right where I could see it as I sipped my morning tea. Mira and I had stayed up past midnight organizing the release plan. The official, notarized will, my husband's final words, signed and witnessed, was about to see the light of day. For years, it had remained quietly locked in my safe, but not anymore. Now, it was time the truth spoke for itself. We'd contacted Tom Ellis, an old friend of my husband's and now editor of the local paper. He answered on the first ring, his voice warm but curious. "You sure you want this public, Lois?" "I'm sure," I said. "They left me no choice." He came by that afternoon. Mira laid out the certified documents, including a scanned copy of the original will. Tom's eyes widened slightly as he read. "This isn't just a rebuttal," he said. "It's a bombshell." "Printed exactly as it is," I told him. "No exaggeration, just facts." He nodded. "We'll go to press tonight." By sunrise, the town was buzzing. My phone lit up with missed calls and half-written messages. I ignored most of them. Mira handled the online fallout. Valora's camp scrambled to discredit the article, but the notarized seal and timestamps were irrefutable. Even on Facebook, where rumors once ruled, the tide had turned. Lois Morley owned the villa, the stocks, the estate, all of it, one post read. Valora's lies just got torched. At the grocery store, 2 women whispered by the cereal aisle. One caught my eye and turned red. "Lois, I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't know." I just smiled. Most people didn't. That evening, Adam confronted Valora in the driveway. I stood inside the house but could see them through the curtain slits. His voice was tight, low, but I heard enough. "You told me it was settled," he said. Valora's hands fluttered. "I thought it was. She's just trying to confuse you." He cut her off. "Did you forge anything?" She paused. Too long. That silence said everything. Later, Mira told me Valora had signed Adam's name on several joint accounts without his knowledge. She used those funds to push her renovation plans that never had legal ground to begin with. Adam never came inside that night. He sat in his car for almost an hour staring at the wheel. A week later, I was asked to speak at the community center's storytelling night. I hesitated at first. It felt strange to stand in front of people who once avoided eye contact in church, but Mira encouraged me. "You don't need their approval," she said, "but they need your truth." So I did it. I didn't give names. I didn't assign blame. I told them about love, boundaries, and the cost of silence. I spoke of how easy it is to be erased, not just from property, but from memory, from voice. When you raise a family, I said, you hope to pass down values, but sometimes what they inherit isn't what you intended. People clapped, some even cried. A few stayed afterward to hug me, whispering apologies they didn't have the courage to say months ago. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew Adam's handwriting instantly. He didn't ask for forgiveness. But he did say, "I should have listened more and asked questions. I'm sorry, Mom." I folded it gently and placed it inside my nightstand drawer. No reply. Not yet. Outside, the winter sun filtered through the trees my husband planted decades ago. I walked to the back garden and sat on the old bench, hands resting on my knees. The truth was out now. Unfiltered, undeniable. And with it, the weight I'd carried quietly for years finally began to lift. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was truth. And truth, when spoken, has a weight no lie can silence. I stepped into my lawyer's office feeling lighter than I have in years. The years of silent endurance, the betrayal, the long winter of whispered rumors. It all felt distant behind me. Mira watched from the side, her eyes warm and steady. On the polished desk lay the new deed. My name, simple and present. Lois Mayfield. No hyphen, no married name. For 40 years it had been silent. Today, I signed it with firm strokes. Each letter felt like reclaiming a part of myself. When I closed the folder, relief washed over me. I whispered to myself, "I'm whole again." Back at home, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to Adam. I never intended to mail it. I poured into it what I couldn't say. How I hoped he found clarity, strength, that he understood there was no bitterness inside me, only longing for reconnection. I folded the note, slid it into my drawer, and felt peace settle. Forgiveness is for the soul, not the headlines. I stepped outside into the crisp air and stood before the garden. In the soft soil, I planted a line of marigolds, bright gold like hope. Each bloom felt like an affirmation that life could grow again, resilient and rooted. Neighbors wandered by, but this time with gentle nods and kind words, not pity, but respect. "They've seen who you truly are," one said. I smiled and nodded, the soil warm beneath my fingers. That evening, I invited a few close friends, Mira, and a handful of faithful townspeople to the villa. Together, we gathered in the living room, firelight flickering on familiar walls. I read aloud from the newly signed will, my words carefully chosen, not in triumph but in quiet strength. I spoke about legacy, motherhood, dignity, and the necessity of boundaries. When my voice echoed against those walls, it felt like unburdening decades of silence. Mira squeezed my hand when I finished. The room held its breath before applause rose soft and steady. This gathering wasn't about victory. It was about restoration. Later, as dusk settled, I sat alone at my desk. There it was, my signature, Lois Mayfield. I gazed at it for a long moment. My maiden name, mine again, honoring who I was before and who I had become. I lifted my pen and wrote beneath it a single line. Finally, me. The ink shimmered under the fading light. Outside, the sky deepened. When everything is stripped away, what's left isn't the past, it's what you choose to carry forward. Sometimes we don't lose ourselves all at once. It happens in small silences, subtle concessions, and the moments we let others rewrite our worth. But I learned, even at 68, that it's never too late to draw a line, reclaim your name, and stand in your own truth. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or taken for granted, let my story remind you, you're allowed to take your power back. You don't need permission to protect what's yours, not just property, but your peace, your name, your dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family pressure? How did you handle it? Drop A in the comments and tell me where you're watching from, whether it's Ohio, Oregon, or overseas. If this story touched your heart, comment A or simply type 1 so I know you're out there listening. And hey, if you found value in this video, if it moved you or made you think, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That's how we stay connected, and it helps us bring you more true stories that speak to the strength, heartbreak, and healing inside all of us. Let's keep building this community, one story at a time.